The white silence. For most of human history, Antarctica has been a blank space on the map, a vast, frozen enigma wrapped in perpetual winter. Even today, satellites struggle to pierce its endless white glare, and what lies beneath that thick armor of ice remains one of the planet's last untouched secrets. But perhaps that silence hides more than geology. Perhaps, beneath those miles of frozen memory, there are traces of a civilization that time, and maybe even history itself, tried to erase. It begins not with discovery but with denial. For centuries, scholars refused to believe that a continent could exist at the bottom of the world. The ancient Greeks had called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, not because they had seen it, but because they felt it must exist as a counterbalance to the lands of the north. It was symmetry by intuition, a philosophy of geography. Yet millennia later, that intuition may prove more prophetic than they could have imagined. When European explorers finally reached the icy frontiers of the South in the early 19th century, they expected nothing more than glaciers and storms. But buried within ancient maps, some centuries older than the age of exploration, lay something that shouldn't exist. The Peary Race Map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral using sources far older than his own time, depicted parts of Antarctica without ice. Mountain ranges, coastlines, and riverbeds, all visible as if mapped from the sky, long before human flight, and long before Antarctica was supposedly discovered. How could that be? Mainstream historians dismiss it as coincidence, an artistic reconstruction, or a misidentified coastline of South America. But others, including cartographic experts and geologists, have found startling correspondences between the Peary Race depiction and modern radar data that peers beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. The shapes match, the rivers align, the question deepens. Who could have mapped an ice-free Antarctica tens of thousands of years ago? To understand the magnitude of that mystery, we must look back, not to the age of explorers, but to the age before ice. According to geological records, Antarctica wasn't always a frozen wasteland. Roughly 34 million years ago, it was lush and forested, home to rivers, trees, and life. Fossilized leaves, petrified wood, and even the remains of ancient reptiles have been unearthed by modern expeditions. Yet some researchers suggest that as recently as 12,000 years ago, parts of the coastline might still have been partially ice-free, at least seasonally. That time frame aligns with the end of the last ice age and the dawn of human civilization as we know it. What if ancient mariners, now lost to history, reached those southern shores when the world's climate was different, when the ice was retreating and the land beneath was still visible? Could their memory have survived through fragments of maps, copied and recopied through centuries, eventually landing in the hands of an Ottoman admiral in the 1500s? If so, the implications are staggering. It would mean that a pre-Ice Age civilization possessed global navigation skills, advanced cartography, and possibly the technology to survey coastlines with near-modern accuracy. It would mean that our understanding of human history, the rise of civilization in the Fertile Crescent, the supposed isolation of continents, might be incomplete, perhaps even deliberately edited. But Antarctica guards its secrets well. Beneath nearly 2 miles of ice, there are mountains taller than the Alps, vast subglacial lakes, and buried valleys that have not seen sunlight for over 20 million years. Among them lies Lake Vostok, one of the largest freshwater reservoirs on Earth, sealed under 4 kilometers of ice. Scientists drilling into it have detected microbial life, organisms that evolved in total isolation for eons. What else could lie sealed in that frozen time capsule? And yet, the deeper scientists dig, the more resistance they encounter, not only from the ice itself, but from institutions that control access to it. Since the 1959 Antarctic Treaty, no nation is allowed to exploit its resources or establish military bases there. Ostensibly, the treaty preserves peace and science, but to some it sounds like the perfect way to keep the world's last untouched continent off limits. Why would so many world powers agree to restrict exploration of a land that could hold the key to Earth's oldest stories? Perhaps because what's buried there challenges more than geology. It challenges chronology, belief, and control. The frozen continent might not just be the planet's end, it might be its beginning. And as satellites continue to scan the deep structures beneath the ice, strange anomalies appear, geometric formations, magnetic disturbances, and heat signatures that defy explanation. Something artificial, perhaps, or at least something unknown. But what came next would change everything. The anomalous maps. What came next began not in the Antarctic itself, but in the archives, the silent rooms where dust and parchment preserve forgotten whispers. It was here, among the old maps of the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery, that historians began to notice patterns too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. The Peary race chart was not alone. It was part of a cartographic lineage, a network of maps showing lands and coastlines that should have been unknown to their makers. One of them, the Oronteus-Phineas map of 1531, depicted Antarctica with surprising accuracy, not as an amorphous blob of ice, but as a defined landmass, complete with rivers, valleys, and mountain chains, drawn as though the cartographer had seen the terrain beneath the glaciers. Modern geologists, comparing Phineas's contours with satellite readings, found uncanny parallels. The Transantarctic Mountains, the coastal curvature of Queen Maud Land, even the placement of inlets mirrored radar topography, as though the 16th century draftsman had access to data invisible until the 20th. How could that be? Phineas claimed his sources came from ancient authorities. Yet, what ancient authorities could possibly have mapped the southernmost continent tens of thousands of years before the first polar expedition? Some researchers, like Charles Hapgood in the mid-20th century, proposed that these maps were copies of even older originals, remnants of a civilization advanced enough to chart the globe long before Egypt or Sumer rose from the mud. Hapgood's controversial theory of Earth crust displacement suggested that Antarctica once lay farther north, in a temperate zone, before a sudden shift in the planet's outer shell plunged it into polar night. Einstein himself, intrigued by the possibility, wrote a foreword to Hapgood's work, acknowledging that the idea deserved consideration. Mainstream science rejected it, of course. Plate tectonics, they argued, explained continental movement far more slowly. Yet even today, subtle traces linger in the geological record, evidence of rapid climatic transitions, sudden melt events, and fossilized forests buried beneath ice. Could the shift have been less a movement of continents and more a catastrophe of axis and atmosphere, a planetary event remembered in myths as the Great Flood, or the day the sun changed its path? Every ancient culture tells a story of a world undone by water or ice. The Sumerians spoke of kingship descending from heaven before a deluge erased it. The Greeks remembered Deucalion and Pyrrha, survivors of a flood sent to cleanse mankind. The Andean legends tell of Viracocha emerging from a storm-tossed lake after the world's destruction. Even the Bible describes waters covering the highest mountains. Could these tales, scattered across continents, be fragments of a shared memory, a cataclysm that reshaped both land and memory? If Antarctica was once ice-free, and if ancient navigators charted it, then perhaps they were witnesses to that very cataclysm. Perhaps they fled from it, their knowledge preserved in scattered colonies, their maps handed down through priesthoods and secret archives until they resurfaced during the Renaissance. Some scholars have noted that the Portolan charts, medieval sea maps renowned for their accuracy, appear suddenly, without a clear developmental history, as though inherited from a lost maritime science. Could that science have originated in a forgotten southern civilization? Skeptics counter that such precision could arise from careful observation and incremental correction by sailors. But there is something haunting about the way these maps anticipate discoveries centuries ahead. The Boache map of 1739, for example, portrays Antarctica divided into two major land masses, with a waterway between, a detail confirmed only by radar mapping in the 1950s. How could an 18th-century geographer know what lay beneath 2 miles of ice? The debate extends beyond the maps themselves. If the cartographers had indeed preserved knowledge of an ancient world, where did that knowledge come from? And what became of those who first recorded it? Did they vanish beneath the very ice they mapped? Or did they migrate northward, leaving behind myths of gods who came from the south, from a land of eternal white? In Incan tradition, Viracocha is described as a bearded man emerging from the Sea of Foam, the Southern Ocean. In Egyptian cosmology, the god Osiris was linked to lands beyond the southern horizon. Even the ancient Polynesians spoke of a cold realm at the edge of the world where spirits dwell. These echoes cannot be dismissed easily. They suggest a pattern, a cultural memory radiating outward from a point near the pole. And if that memory is rooted in something real, then the icy desert at the bottom of the planet may conceal not just geological history, but the remnants of human, or perhaps pre-human, presence. In 1949, when seismic surveys first revealed mountain ranges beneath Antarctica's ice, the scientific community was stunned. The so-called Gamburtsev Mountains, comparable in height to the European Alps, lay completely hidden, untouched for tens of millions of years. How could such towering peaks remain so perfectly preserved under the crushing weight of glaciers? Some geophysicists suggested a warm bedrock or geothermal activity below, hinting at a hidden heat source, perhaps a volcanic system, perhaps something else entirely. The mystery deepened. By the mid-20th century, military expeditions began to take notice. Operation High Jump, a massive U.S. Navy mission in 1946-47, officially aimed to train personnel for cold climates and map the continent. Yet its scale, 13 ships, 4,700 men, aircraft, and advanced technology, far exceeded the needs of simple reconnaissance. Declassified reports later hinted at unidentified aerial phenomena observed near the South Pole. Coincidence or not, High Jump marked the beginning of an era in which Antarctica became both a scientific frontier and a geopolitical enigma. And still, beneath the formal reports and the academic debates, the question lingers. Who first drew the map of the impossible continent? Who looked upon an ice-free Antarctica? And when? Because if those maps are accurate, they do more than redraw coastlines. They redraw time itself. But the next revelation would not come from parchment or ink. It would come from ice and data. What scientists would soon uncover beneath the glaciers would challenge everything we thought we knew about the age of the Earth and of ourselves. Beneath the ice. The story shifts now from the ink of old maps to the instruments of modern science. For centuries, Antarctica was seen as nothing more than a geological endgame, a land of sterile ice where life could not thrive and history could not survive. But beginning in the 1950s, a quiet revolution began beneath the frozen crust. As radar and seismic waves probed deeper into the continent, what they found was not the featureless bedrock scientists expected, but structure, warmth, and motion. In 1958, during the International Geophysical Year, a Soviet team at Vostok Station drilled into the East Antarctic ice sheet. What they discovered would baffle researchers for decades: layers of ancient ice, perfectly preserved, recording not just millennia, but millions of years of atmospheric history. But the deeper the drills went, the stranger the readings became. Around 2 miles below the surface, radar pulses began to echo as though they were striking water, liquid water, in a place where the temperature should have been nearly 90 degrees. Beneath 4 kilometers of solid ice lay something impossible, a vast, unfrozen lake, sealed from the world for at least 20 million years. They called it Lake Vostok. At first, scientists thought it was an anomaly, a quirk of geothermal heat and pressure keeping water from freezing. But as satellite imaging improved, they found hundreds of such subglacial lakes scattered across the continent. Some were small, others as large as entire nations. Each was cut off from sunlight, isolated from the surface since long before human civilization began. Each was, in essence, a natural time capsule. When the first sterile probes sampled Vostok's waters in the early 2000s, what they found defied expectations. Complex microbial DNA, life that had adapted to complete darkness, crushing pressure, and chemical isolation. To biologists, this was thrilling. It suggested that life could thrive in places previously thought barren, even on icy moons like Europa or Enceladus. But to others, particularly the archaeologists and theorists studying ancient anomalies, it raised a deeper, more unsettling question. What else might have been sealed away, preserved by ice and time? In 2012, a team of Russian scientists announced that they had retrieved core samples from Lake Vostok containing bacterial strains unknown to science, organisms that shared no genetic lineage with any known species on Earth. The claim was quickly contested, dismissed as contamination. Yet, the genetic data remained ambiguous. A few months later, the team went silent. Officially, their research continued under classified oversight. Unofficially, rumors began to circulate. Whispers of complex organic structures found in the samples and of data embargoed under national security orders. Around the same time, NASA's Earth-observing satellites began detecting thermal anomalies, heat signatures emanating from deep beneath the ice in West Antarctica. Some matched volcanic activity, but others did not. They formed geometric patterns, symmetrical clusters, that no natural fault line could explain. Scientists suggested possibilities: ancient lava tubes, unusual geothermal vents. But the patterns persisted, drawing uncanny parallels to the hexagonal arrangement of some ancient megalithic sites: Stonehenge, Karnak, Nabta Playa. The resemblance was dismissed as pareidolia, yet once seen it was hard to unsee. In 2016, another revelation shook the scientific world. Deep radar imaging beneath the ice of Wilkes Land revealed a massive gravitational anomaly, a circular depression over 300 miles wide, buried under nearly a mile of ice. Some geophysicists theorized it could be the scar of an ancient asteroid impact, perhaps even the one that triggered the Permian extinction 250 million years ago. Others quietly suggested a darker possibility, that the anomaly represented not a crater, but the buried remains of an immense artificial structure, a city, a base, or something older than human time itself. Officially, no such structure has ever been confirmed. Unofficially, several nations, including the United States, Russia, and China, have conducted geophysical research missions in the area under heavy secrecy. Satellite flight paths were quietly restricted, logistics routes were classified, and journalists who tried to investigate often found their access abruptly revoked. But the data leaks continued. Pilots reported strange magnetic disturbances near the southern pole, compass readings spinning wildly, navigation systems glitching. Remote sensors recorded bursts of energy deep below the ice, frequencies not consistent with seismic or volcanic events. A few whistleblowers claimed these signals repeated with mathematical precision, as though encoded. Could these phenomena be relics of a forgotten epoch, or remnants of an ancient technology long entombed? Even mainstream scientists have begun to admit that Antarctica's past is far stranger than once believed. Beneath the ice sheet lie entire mountain ranges, like the Gamburtsev chain, whose sharp, uneroded peaks suggest they were never exposed to weathering, preserved in a cryogenic stillness since the continent froze over. And beneath those mountains, radar imaging reveals vast caverns, some so large they could fit entire cities. The conditions inside are stable, warmed by geothermal heat and isolated by insulating ice. If life could exist in Lake Vostok, why not in those subterranean realms? There are whispers, even among field researchers, of sudden data reclassification, of results that vanish from public databases, replaced by vague errors in measurement. Yet every new discovery pushes the same question forward. What exactly lies beneath? The more we probe Antarctica's secrets, the more it begins to resemble not a barren wasteland, but a vault, a deliberate preservation. Perhaps the ice is not just a natural formation, but a seal, a planetary safeguard against something that was never meant to be unearthed. And if that is true, then those who seek the truth beneath the ice may be uncovering more than fossils or rock. They may be awakening memory itself, the frozen record of a world before ours. But then, in 2017, a discovery would send shockwaves far beyond the scientific community and turn speculation into confrontation. What they found that year was not natural. The 2017 discovery. It began with a satellite anomaly, a faint signal that would have been dismissed as background noise had it not repeated every 11 hours with eerie precision. In early 2017, a European Space Agency instrument designed to study ice mass variations over Antarctica's Wilkes Land recorded rhythmic electromagnetic pulses coming from beneath the ice, signals too ordered, too regular to be geophysical in nature. At first, scientists thought it was equipment interference. Then a second satellite confirmed the same pattern, and then a third. The pulses seemed to originate from within the vast gravitational anomaly already known in the region, the one stretching over 300 miles beneath the ice. What could generate such a precise periodic emission in a place where no radio transmission should exist? Within weeks, an international team was dispatched, officially to conduct subglacial geological research. Unofficially, it included not only geophysicists but also engineers, linguists, and defense specialists. The mission was quiet, unannounced, and heavily protected. Several of the scientists later listed as part of that team would simply vanish from public records. According to internal reports later leaked to independent researchers, the team used advanced ice-penetrating radar and gravimetric sensors to locate the source of the emission. What they found was staggering. Nearly 2,000 meters beneath the surface, embedded in solid ice, was a perfectly geometric structure, a series of concentric arcs forming an immense oval shape, aligned precisely with the Earth's magnetic south. It was, by all metrics, artificial. Some described it as a buried installation. Others, more cautiously, as an architectural anomaly. Whatever it was enormous, nearly 30 miles across, and appeared to be composed of a dense metallic material. The reflections were too sharp for natural rock. The radar data suggested internal chambers, corridors, and symmetrical partitions. In other words, it was a construction. If true, it was a discovery that could rewrite history or destroy it. The data was immediately classified. Civilian researchers involved in the initial analysis were removed from the project. Only fragments of their notes survived. Sketches of spiraling tunnels, circular rooms, and a central cavity larger than any known human structure. Several sources claimed that temperature sensors detected an anomalous heat source emanating from the site, as though something deep within was still active. Then the transmission stopped. The rhythmic pulses ceased without explanation, and with them, so did all official communication from the expedition. Weeks later, when an Australian research team operating thousands of miles away reported bright lights appearing over the same region, visible even through heavy cloud cover, the phenomenon was quickly explained as atmospheric refraction. Yet the lights persisted for nearly 20 minutes, forming an elliptical halo that mirrored the geometry of the buried structure. Coincidence, said the agencies, but to those who had followed the trail, it looked like a signal, or perhaps a warning. In the months that followed, a pattern emerged. Satellite images of the Wilkes Land sector began to vanish from public databases, replaced by blurred or pixelated patches. the Google Earth coordinates of the area became partially redacted. Independent analysts tracking magnetic field variations noted an unexplained distortion centered on the same coordinates, a subtle but measurable anomaly extending for hundreds of miles. By late 2017, rumors began leaking from defense circles that the operation in Antarctica had entered a containment phase. A few journalists received anonymous tips claiming that something not of modern origin had been found. One whistleblower described it as a vault, not a structure built in the ice, but one that predated it. "We didn't build it," he wrote in a deleted message, "and it's not empty." The implications were almost unthinkable. If the structure predated the ice, it would have to be at least 12 million years old, far older than Homo sapiens, even older than most mammals recognizable to us today. Was it a remnant of a previous civilization, a refuge, or, as some have suggested, a remnant of something not human at all? Curiously, around the same time, several world leaders made unannounced visits to Antarctica. In February 2016, Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church conducted a private ritual at a remote station, a rare event dismissed as symbolic. Later that year, then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visited on Election Day, officially to discuss climate change. Yet his route took him dangerously close to the restricted Wilkes sector. Why would such high-ranking officials travel to one of the most inhospitable and secretive places on Earth? Even Pope Francis, sources say, was briefed privately about discoveries of profound theological significance related to the Antarctic region. The Vatican Observatory, long interested in astrobiology, issued a cryptic statement shortly thereafter. "Truth may lie where the world cannot reach." The convergence of religion, science, and secrecy was no coincidence. Something beneath the ice was forcing humanity's oldest institutions to reevaluate what they thought they knew about creation, extinction, and perhaps even divinity itself. As researchers continued to analyze the data, one disturbing observation surfaced. The electromagnetic pulses recorded before the silence were not random. When converted to sound frequencies, they formed harmonic patterns, mathematical ratios identical to those used in ancient architecture, the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, and even the Parthenon. It was as if the buried structure's signal spoke the same universal language of geometry that ancient builders once revered as sacred. Coincidence again? Or connection? By the end of 2017, Antarctica was no longer a frozen void. It was a cipher, a locked archive of deep time whose contents, if revealed, could collapse the conventional story of human origin. Governments tightened control. Data streams were encrypted, and yet, despite every effort to silence it, the world had begun to listen, because the ice, once mute, was beginning to whisper. But the next revelation would not come from secret military data or satellites. It would come from the oldest source of all, the planet itself, and its message would not be easy to ignore. The planet's memory. When scientists first began analyzing the isotopic layers of Antarctic ice, they thought they were simply reading the climate's diary, a record of temperature, carbon dioxide, and dust stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. But with every core extracted, the story grew stranger. The ice did not just preserve the atmosphere. It preserved anomalies, microscopic traces that didn't fit any known terrestrial origin. At first, it was tiny metallic spheres, perfectly round, embedded deep within layers dated to more than 400,000 years ago. Their composition was unusual, a nickel-iron alloy with trace elements of iridium and osmium, metals rare on Earth but common in meteorites. Some argued they were cosmic dust, yet their symmetrical shape and uniform distribution defied the chaotic pattern of natural impacts. It was as if they had been dispersed deliberately, a residue of technology, not geology. Later, researchers began finding microscopic filaments, carbon-based and intricately woven, in ice samples from nearly 2 miles down. Under electron microscopes, The filaments appeared artificial, hollow, segmented, and arranged in repeating geometries. The initial explanation was contamination, but the deeper they drilled, the older the samples became, and the more such structures they found. If contamination was the cause, it would mean modern material had somehow migrated through millions of years of frozen strata, an impossibility. The more the data accumulated, the more Antarctica began to look less like an untouched wilderness and more like a burial ground of deep time, a place where remnants of an earlier epoch, perhaps even an earlier species, were entombed. One startling clue emerged from the ice cores of Dome Sea Station, analyzed in the late 2010s. Among the trapped air bubbles was a trace gas signature unlike anything seen in natural cycles, elevated levels of fluorinated compounds, similar to those produced by modern industry. The problem was their age. The layers containing those compounds were dated to nearly 60,000 years ago, tens of millennia before human civilization, let alone modern chemistry. How could industrial byproducts exist in the atmosphere before industry itself? Geochemists struggled to explain it. Some invoked volcanic fluorides, others suggested a data error, but the pattern was consistent across multiple cores, multiple locations. It was as though, long before humanity, another intelligent presence had altered the planet's chemistry, leaving its fingerprints frozen in time. That idea, that Earth itself remembers, is not new. Indigenous traditions around the world speak of the planet as a living being, capable of memory, capable of grief. The Aboriginal Dreamtime describes the land as conscious, recalling every footprint and event. The Inca believed that mountains could speak through stone. The Sumerians called the earth Kai, the mother who records. To modern scientists, these were metaphors, but perhaps they were intuitions of something real. The planet's geological strata as a biological archive, its ice and rock recording not just physical, but civilizational memory. If so, then Antarctica is the deepest vault in that archive, the hard drive of the planet's forgotten epochs. Seismic imaging reveals that the crust beneath Antarctica is older than previously thought, containing rocks dating back over 1 billion years, fragments of an ancient supercontinent called Gondwana. But scattered among those rocks are isotopic signatures that don't match any known continental lineage. They appear foreign, inserted, as if portions of crust had been transplanted from elsewhere. Could this suggest a cataclysmic displacement, a reshuffling of Earth's skin, or even, as radical theorists propose, an intervention? Some climatologists now believe that the rapid onset of Antarctica's glaciation, a near instantaneous freeze around 12,000 years ago, was triggered not by slow orbital cycles, but by a sudden event, a massive influx of energy from above or within. Ice core samples show abrupt spikes in nitrate concentration, consistent with high-energy radiation bursts. Something happened, fast, violent, and global. The Younger Dryas period, which brought the Ice Age to its sudden end elsewhere, coincides almost exactly with the sealing of Antarctica beneath its final shell of ice. Was it a meteor impact, a solar event, or the collapse of something ancient, a technological catastrophe buried under myth as the fall of Atlantis? Plato's story of Atlantis speaks of a mighty civilization destroyed in a single day and night by fire and water. The same pattern appears in the Popol Vuh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Egyptian destruction of mankind texts. Civilizations erased not gradually, but in an instant. Could these myths, scattered across continents, describe the same event, the same planetary reset? The timing fits. Around 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose abruptly by more than 400 feet. Coastlines drowned, megafauna vanished, and humanity, or what remained of it, began again from scattered survivors. In that light, Antarctica's sudden burial beneath ice might not be a coincidence. It might have been the epicenter. If that's true, then the continent's frozen crust could be more than a natural formation. It could be a shroud, preserving the relics of a world that perished overnight. Perhaps the structure discovered beneath the Wilkes Land anomaly is not an alien artifact at all, but a remnant of that lost world, an ark a vault, or a final refuge built before the Great Freeze. But if the Earth itself carries memory, if its strata and ice hold not only data, but intent, then the pulse detected in 2017 might not have been a signal from something artificial. It might have been the Earth's own echo, a cry from its ancient memory banks, a system rebooting after millennia of silence. Because buried deep within the frozen continent lies not just evidence of the past, but evidence that the past may not be as dead as we think. And soon humanity would learn that some memories refuse to stay buried, because the next anomaly to emerge from the ice would come with a sound, a voice, the voice from the ice. It started as a vibration, a low, haunting resonance that rolled through the ice like a distant heartbeat. The sensors that caught it were not designed for sound. They were part of an array built to detect seismic activity and microfractures beneath the East Antarctic plateau. Yet in 2019, as winter cloaked the continent in 24-hour night, the instruments began registering rhythmic pulses unlike any tectonic pattern ever recorded. The signals repeated with such precision, one every 16 minutes, that they resembled the cadence of a metronome rather than the chaos of geology. At first, scientists called it the Antarctic hum. They thought it might be caused by glacial flow or subglacial water movement, but the frequency was too regular, too consistent. As more research stations picked up the same pattern, its origin became impossible to ignore. The vibrations were coming from deep beneath Wilkes Land, the same region where 2 years earlier the electromagnetic anomaly had gone silent. Coincidence? A team from the German Alfred Wegener Institute recalibrated their sensors, converting the seismic oscillations into audible sound. What they heard was not static, it was structure. The tone fluctuated in exact harmonic intervals, forming sequences that matched mathematical ratios found in musical scales, the same ratios encoded in ancient temples and monuments across the world. Someone or something seemed to be broadcasting through the ice. When the sound was publicly released, briefly before it was reclassified, it spread through scientific forums like wildfire. To the untrained ear, it was a deep drone, almost like wind moaning through a cavern. But audio engineers noticed hidden modulation buried in the frequency. When amplified, it revealed a pattern of pulses eerily similar to Morse code. The translation, if it could be called that, formed repeating triplets, sequences of 3 bursts, then silence, then 3 again, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, an SOS. At least that was how some interpreted it. NASA analysts later admitted privately that the signal bore statistical signs of intelligent origin, too patterned to be natural, too structured to dismiss. Yet the official statement reduced it to an unexplained glaciological resonance. Within days, the original data disappeared from the public research servers. Still, the sound could not be unheard. Copies circulated among researchers, some of whom began to notice psychological effects when exposed to prolonged playback. Subjects reported vivid dreams of frozen cities, metallic corridors, and lights moving beneath translucent ice. Others experienced feelings of déjà vu, a strange sense of recognition, as though they were remembering something buried deep within their own ancestral memory. The phenomenon spread. Around the same time, magnetic disturbances intensified across the southern hemisphere. Whales in the South Pacific began beaching themselves in record numbers, as if disoriented by a signal no one could detect. Compass readings in parts of Australia fluctuated wildly. Even GPS systems on polar flights began to lose accuracy. Something was stirring beneath Antarctica. In early 2020, a small private satellite launched by a consortium of independent researchers, ostensibly for studying atmospheric particles, captured an image that reignited every suppressed theory. Through thin seasonal cracks in the ice near the Transantarctic Mountains, thermal sensors recorded a faint but clear signature, a geometric formation glowing faintly in the infrared spectrum. It was circular, precisely 1.6 kilometers across, and arranged in 12 symmetrical spokes, radiating from a central point. The formation lay directly above the region where the voice originated. It looked unmistakably like a structure. Attempts to verify the data were swiftly blocked. The satellite company was purchased within weeks by a corporate front linked to defense contractors. The original images vanished, but by then, the footage had already leaked. And like the Peary race map centuries earlier, it began circulating among those who refused to believe coincidence could explain everything. Linguists, mathematicians, and even musicians joined the analysis. The harmonics of the Antarctic hum were mapped against human language frequencies, yielding chilling results. The resonance matched the phonetic intervals of ancient Sumerian cuneiform chants, hymns once believed to speak to the gods. The correlation was nearly exact. How could a vibration from beneath the Antarctic ice mirror the sonic architecture of one of Earth's earliest civilizations? Unless, of course, the two were connected, separated not by space, but by time. Some proposed that the voice was a natural phenomenon, a planetary resonance amplified by subglacial caverns. Others whispered that it was an activation signal, a countdown, or a memory awakening after 12 millennia of silence. Whatever the cause, one fact was clear. The continent was no longer silent. For the first time in recorded history, Antarctica was speaking back. And as it did, ancient myths began to look less like allegory and more like remembrance. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, a luminous land beyond the north winds where gods once lived before retreating underground. The Mayans told of the white place of origin from which their ancestors came, a realm of light that sank beneath ice. Even the Book of Enoch described a place of cold and crystal where the watchers fell. Were they describing the same location, the same event that now resonated beneath the South Pole? In the weeks following the first recordings, seismic activity intensified across the entire continent. Icequakes multiplied, forming patterns that resembled concentric ripples. Whatever was beneath the ice was not static, it was moving. Then, on June 21st, 2020, the winter solstice, the signal changed. The intervals shortened, and a new frequency joined the resonance, a rising tone, climbing in pitch, until it abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, and then the ice began to crack. What emerged from that fracture would defy every boundary between science, myth, and memory. The awakening ice. The fracture opened in silence. No explosion, no thunder, only the soft groan of a continent shifting in its sleep. At first, the satellite images showed nothing unusual. A thin fissure, a line drawn across the East Antarctic plateau like a scar of light. But within hours, it began to spread. The rift expanded to nearly 30 miles in length, running precisely along the coordinates of the buried anomaly in Wilkes Land. Scientists at McMurdo Station received the seismic data first. The waveforms didn't resemble a quake or glacial calving. They carried harmonic interference, the same frequencies that had defined the mysterious Antarctic hum. In essence, the signal had not just returned, it had manifested physically, tearing open the ice that had sealed it for millennia. The world above had no idea. Antarctica is, after all, the quietest continent on Earth. No media, no witnesses, only machines and a handful of humans braving a place that does not forgive curiosity. Yet the handful of researchers stationed within radio range began reporting strange phenomena. Equipment flickered, compasses spun without cause. Auroras, visible even in daylight, shimmered over the horizon in colors no one could name. Satellite radar from Argentina's Polar Observatory caught something impossible. A pulse of heat, circular and expanding, centered exactly on the Wilkes anomaly. The burst lasted precisely 7 minutes, releasing as much thermal energy as a volcanic eruption, yet no ash, no debris, no crater. When the thermal bloom faded, it left behind a cavity, visible through the ice, a dome-shaped void stretching hundreds of meters beneath the surface. Within that dome, the temperature remained a steady 2 degrees C, far warmer than its surroundings. Something inside was generating heat. By the second day, the rift had stabilized, forming a natural opening large enough to admit light from the pale polar sun. Drones dispatched from nearby stations captured only seconds of footage before transmission cut out. But those seconds were enough. They showed something impossible. Angular walls of black material glistening beneath layers of translucent frost. Smooth, geometric, and unmistakably artificial. The footage was classified within hours. Yet, as always, fragments survived. An anonymous engineer at the European Polar Research Center leaked a series of still frames showing what appeared to be inscriptions etched into the inner walls, patterns resembling both circuitry and writing, flowing in curvilinear lines like veins of light. To linguists who studied the leaked images, the resemblance to Proto-Sumerian symbols was uncanny. How could an ancient language appear in a place untouched by human hands? Some claimed the patterns were natural crystal formations. Others, more daring, argued they were a language older than humanity itself. A code etched into the very geometry of the structure, meant to be read not by sight but by resonance. A frequency language. That theory gained traction when sound returned. At 0317 UTC on July 2, 2020, seismic monitors across the continent detected another pulse, shorter this time, higher in pitch. When converted to audio, it formed an oscillation at 432 hertz, the same frequency ancient cultures associated with harmony, healing, and cosmic alignment. The sound resonated for 7 minutes, then ceased. Minutes later, the temperature inside the dome began to rise. Satellite thermography showed a slow but measurable increase, as if something beneath the ice was awakening from dormancy. Some speculated geothermal reaction. Others whispered of reactivation, the reawakening of an ancient mechanism sealed away for 12,000 years. Within 48 hours, all civilian access to the region was suspended. The Antarctic Treaty Secretariat issued an unprecedented temporary prohibition on aerial observation, citing safety concerns related to subglacial instability. But to those following the data, the meaning was clear. Something had been found, and someone was trying to contain it. Across the scientific world, theories began to collide. Was this the remnant of a prehistoric civilization advanced enough to manipulate energy and geometry? Or was it something far older, a relic of the time before recorded humanity, when the Earth itself was younger and other intelligences may have walked its surface? As the news seeped through encrypted channels, a few brave voices broke ranks. One was Dr. Amelia Varga, a Hungarian geophysicist who had worked on early radar surveys of Wilkes Land. In an anonymous interview published under a pseudonym, she described the readings from 2017. Metallic lattices, she said, with repeating fractal symmetry, unlike any natural formation. Her words were chilling. We thought it was dead. We were wrong. It's not a ruin. It's a machine. Within weeks, her name disappeared from academic directories. Her research institution denied she had ever worked there, but her words lingered, especially the last part. If the structure beneath Antarctica is a machine, what was it built to do? Perhaps it was a generator, harnessing the planet's magnetic core, perhaps a transmitter, designed to communicate with something or someone far beyond Earth. Or perhaps, most unsettling of all, it was a safeguard built to prevent something from awakening. Because if it was sleeping, then humanity had just shaken it awake. In the months that followed, satellite data showed subtle but measurable changes in the magnetic field around the South Pole. The local declination began to drift faster than predicted, as though the pole itself were shifting. No one could explain it. But to those who listened closely to the voice from the ice, one truth was becoming clear. Antarctica was no longer a passive relic of the past. It was active, alive, and soon the world would begin to feel its pulse. Because what stirred beneath the ice had no intention of staying buried. The pulse of the planet. By the summer of 2021, the world began to feel it, though few recognized the source. Earth's magnetic field, usually slow and stable, had started to behave unpredictably. Compass readings deviated across the southern hemisphere. Solar radiation patterns shifted without clear cause. Navigation systems required recalibration almost weekly. What no one realized at first was that all of these anomalies radiated outward from one epicenter, Wilkes Land, Antarctica. At first, the changes were subtle, then came the pulse. In August, a network of satellites belonging to NASA's Themis project recorded a global electromagnetic surge, a faint but measurable vibration that resonated through the magnetosphere. It lasted precisely 7 minutes and 24 seconds. The waveform matched no known solar or cosmic event. But when researchers overlapped it with archived seismic data, the match was undeniable. It was identical to the frequency of the Antarctic hum. The Earth itself was echoing the same rhythm. Some called it coincidence. Others saw something more, a synchronization, as if the planet were tuning itself to a buried resonance, a heartbeat reawakening after an age of silence. By late 2021, the pulse became more frequent. Power grids in South America flickered in synchrony with magnetic fluctuations. Deep-sea sensors in the Indian Ocean registered faint vibrations traveling through the mantle. Even migratory animals began altering their routes, as if responding to a call humanity could not hear. And yet we were hearing it, just not with our ears. Hospitals across the southern hemisphere began reporting an uptick in cases of tinnitus, people claiming to hear a low-frequency hum coming from nowhere. Sensitive audio equipment confirmed a barely perceptible infrasound between 17 and 20 hertz, the same range as the Antarctic vibration. It could pass through solid matter, even through bone, resonating with the human body itself. When the data reached the World Magnetic Observatory, the director quietly classified it, but not before a handful of independent researchers noticed the pattern. The hum, when plotted over time, formed a geometric waveform identical to the shape of an ancient symbol, the flower of life, a sacred pattern found carved into the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, in Chinese cosmology, and in Mayan glyphs. Was this geometry coincidence, or a language written through resonance? A message encoded in the pulse of the planet itself? A small team of scientists, linguists, and sound engineers began to study the phenomenon independently. They discovered that when the hum's frequencies were transposed upward into the human hearing range and mapped spatially, it formed three-dimensional standing waves, nodes and vortices that clustered around major ancient sites across the globe. Giza, Tiwanaku, Göbekli Tepe. The pattern was unmistakable. It was as though the same energy awakening beneath Antarctica was resonating with the oldest monuments on Earth, structures long theorized to be tuned to planetary frequencies. The implications were staggering. Had the ancients known of this pulse? Had they built their temples and pyramids not merely as tombs or observatories, but as resonant amplifiers, instruments designed to respond to the same planetary heartbeat? Ancient texts from across civilizations spoke of such times, epochs when the Earth itself sang. The Sumerians called it the voice of Kai, the Egyptians the breath of Ra. In Hindu cosmology, the sound Om was said to be the primal vibration through which the universe came into being. Were these myths memories of a previous cycle, an age when the planet's energy aligned with consciousness itself? If Antarctica was the source, then the pulse was not merely geological, it was global. Governments began to respond. Military satellites were redirected toward the South Pole under the guise of monitoring climate change. The U.S. Air Force quietly activated Project Icebridge, originally designed to study polar ice dynamics, for classified geomagnetic research. Meanwhile, Russian stations near Lake Vostok ceased transmitting publicly, their frequencies encrypted beyond civilian reach. Something massive was unfolding beneath the ice, and the world's most powerful institutions were listening. Then, on December 12, 2021, the pulse changed. For the first time, it was not uniform. The oscillation split into dual frequencies, two tones overlapping in harmony, creating a perfect fifth interval in the musical scale. In sacred geometry, that interval symbolizes balance between heaven and earth. The data terrified those who understood what it meant. Because the Earth's core, which generates the magnetic field, cannot spontaneously produce such harmonic variation. Something external or internal was modulating it, something intelligent, and it was growing stronger. Over the following months, seismic sensors detected increasing microtremors beneath Antarctica's crust. These tremors were not random. They followed mathematical progressions, Fibonacci sequences embedded in their intervals, patterns nature does not produce on its own. By early 2022, entire regions of ice began to shift subtly, as if responding to an internal pressure. Satellite imagery revealed faint circular fractures forming around Wilkes Land. Not cracks, but spirals. Each new formation mirrored the geometry of the structure buried below. Something was rising. In ancient Mesopotamian tablets, there is a line often overlooked. When the gods of the deep stir, the world's axis trembles. Perhaps it was metaphor. Perhaps it was memory. But as the pulse intensified, even the Earth's rotation began to fluctuate. Milliseconds shaved from each day. NASA attributed it to glacial rebound, but others, those watching the frequency data in secret, knew better. It was resonance, the planet answering its own buried echo. And for the first time, that echo began to align with something else, something not of this Earth. Because as the pulse reached its peak amplitude in mid-2022, telescopes orbiting beyond the moon detected synchronized bursts of energy from deep space, a series of fast radio signals matching the Antarctic frequency exactly. The Earth was calling, and something was calling back. What followed next would change the very definition of life and origin. The signal from the stars. When the first synchronized burst reached Earth's deep space observatories, it lasted less than a second, a flicker, easily dismissed as background interference. Yet buried within that brief flash was a pattern that no random cosmic source could produce. It pulsed in exact rhythm with the Antarctic frequency, like an echo arriving from across the universe. Fast radio bursts, FRBs, are one of astrophysics' greatest mysteries. They are powerful, millisecond-long flashes of energy, often coming from billions of light-years away. Most appear once and never again, but this one was different. It repeated every 16 minutes, precisely in phase with the oscillations detected under Wilkes Land. Another burst struck the ionosphere. It was as if the Earth and the sky were locked in a dialogue, a call and response between the frozen south and the abyss of space. The observatories at Arecibo, Parkes, and Caime confirmed it. The source appeared to originate near the constellation Eridanus, the river of the sky, in ancient mythology said to flow into the southern pole of heaven. Its coordinates pointed to a void, a dark patch of space devoid of stars. Astronomers had long called it the Eridanus supervoid, a cosmic anomaly where background radiation is weaker than anywhere else in the universe. Now, that void was speaking. The scientific community was divided. Some argued it was coincidence, a natural phenomenon aligning by chance. Others whispered that the Earth was responding to something older than humanity, perhaps even older than the solar system itself. One striking detail emerged when analysts converted the signal's frequency into visual data. The resulting waveform produced a shape, a spiral of 12 arms converging into a central eye. It was identical to the formation detected beneath Antarctica's ice months earlier. Two identical geometries, one buried in the southern continent, one imprinted across light years of space. Coincidence again, or connection? The discovery reignited ancient legends that had once seemed pure mythology. Civilizations separated by oceans had spoken of star teachers, beings who came from the heavens before the flood and retreated beneath the waters of the south. when their time was done. The Dogon tribe of Mali told of Nomo, amphibious beings from the star Sirius, who promised to return when the world below awakened. The Egyptians spoke of Osiris, lord of the hidden chamber, who came from the stars and was entombed in the southern lands. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came from above. Were all these ancient stories, scattered and fragmented, describing the same event, the same descent, now reversing itself? In November 2022, as the Antarctic pulse reached record amplitude, deep space sensors detected a secondary wave riding the FRB signal, a modulation that appeared to contain data. When decoded using mathematical constants, pi, the golden ratio, prime numbers, the message revealed a binary grid, a three-dimensional lattice with 12 nodes connected by spiraling filaments. Astrophysicists stared in disbelief. The structure matched almost perfectly the subglacial geometry mapped by radar beneath Wilkes Land. The same 12-spoke design, the same proportions. Someone, or something, had transmitted an image of what lay buried beneath Antarctica from light years away. That was the moment the narrative shifted from mystery to existential question. Was the structure beneath the ice a beacon, a receiver waiting for a signal, or was it a transmitter, sending a call outward to its origin, now finally answered? The response from world governments was immediate and silent. Observatories were ordered to reroute their feeds. Research data went dark. The public explanation was instrument maintenance, but behind closed doors, private channels between agencies in the US, China, and Russia surged with encrypted traffic. Meanwhile, independent researchers who had archived the raw radio data began uncovering something even more disturbing. When the waveform of the signal was slowed down and converted into audio, it produced a sound, deep, melodic, almost human, and beneath that tone, layered like an echo, were harmonic variations that resembled a voice. Not words as we know them, but phonetic sequences structured like language. Rhythm, pause, intonation. When linguists applied spectral analysis, they found phonemes eerily similar to the proto-languages of early Mesopotamia, the same tonal patterns used in ancient Sumerian hymns to the gods of the deep. The voice from space was speaking in the tongue of our first civilization. Coincidence or memory? In December, the resonance reached its climax. The FRB and the Antarctic hum synchronized perfectly for 7 minutes and 24 seconds, the same duration as the global electromagnetic pulse recorded the year before. During that window, satellite magnetometers recorded a faint distortion encircling the Earth's magnetic field, as if it were being gently tugged by an external force, and then, without warning, the Antarctic signal ceased. Silence. For the first time in years, the continent went quiet. The vibrations stopped, the temperature stabilized, the magnetic drift paused. It was as if whatever was beneath the ice had received its message and responded. Across the world, strange phenomena followed. Auroras appeared at the equator. Migratory birds changed their patterns. And in one of the most remote research stations near Lake Vostok, a field camera captured an image that would never make it to the public. It showed a column of light, thin, white, and perfectly vertical, emerging from the ice and vanishing into the clouds. Was it energy release, plasma discharge, or something leaving? No official explanation was ever offered. The footage was confiscated, but the witnesses who saw it described a feeling unlike anything they'd ever experienced, a pressure in the chest, as if the Earth itself had exhaled after holding its breath for 12,000 years. Whatever happened that day, it was not the end. It was an awakening, because after the silence, the signal returned. Not from beneath the ice, not from space, but from within us. And that would be the moment when history, myth, and biology converged, revealing that the true secret of Antarctica was not buried in the ice at all. It was buried in the human genome, the genetic memory. When the Antarctic hum went silent, scientists assumed the mystery had ended. But within weeks, laboratories across the world began detecting something else. faint, synchronized fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic resonance that mirrored subtle changes in biological systems. It began with migratory animals, whose internal compasses faltered, but soon the anomalies appeared in human physiology as well. It started with dreams. In early 2023, sleep researchers at the Max Planck Institute noticed an unprecedented global increase in shared dream motifs. Thousands of subjects from unrelated cultures reported near-identical imagery: vast white landscapes, black geometric structures, spirals of light descending into ice. Some heard a tone, low, harmonic, resonant, the same frequency recorded in Antarctica years before. To skeptics, it was coincidence, a subconscious echo of viral news. But the timing was exact. The dreams began 48 hours after the final synchronized pulse between Earth and the Eridanus signal. Something had changed, not only in the environment, but in consciousness itself. DNA biologists analyzing long-term space weather effects on human tissue began noticing anomalies in electromagnetic susceptibility. Certain sequences within human mitochondrial DNA exhibited unusual resonance when exposed to frequencies between 17 and 20 Hz, the precise range of the Antarctic vibration. It was as if a dormant genetic circuit had been reactivated, and that was when a pattern appeared, one that would turn science into heresy. In late 2023, an independent genome analysis group in Iceland published data showing a mysterious strand of non-coding DNA present in all human beings that did not match known evolutionary markers. The sequence was ancient, far older than the Homo sapiens lineage, and shared subtle mathematical symmetry with the harmonics of the Antarctic signal. The group dubbed it Sequence X. At first, their claim was ignored, then suppressed. Within weeks, their database was offline, their credentials revoked. But the information had already spread among underground researchers, and when other labs quietly replicated the results, the implications became undeniable. Part of the human genome carried an acoustic signature, a resonance pattern that could be activated by specific frequencies. The Antarctic pulse had triggered it. Geneticists began calling it resonant DNA, sequences that behave less like biological code and more like memory storage, capable of holding vibrational information. When exposed to harmonic frequencies, certain genes emitted measurable electromagnetic fields, like antennas tuned to cosmic rhythms. It was an idea once dismissed as pseudoscience. Now, it was data. If DNA could remember sound, if it could be activated by planetary resonance, then human beings were not simply descendants of evolution, but inheritors of a forgotten program, a code written long before history, awaiting reactivation. That revelation resurrected an ancient question: who wrote it? Every culture's creation myth hints at a moment when the gods, or the teachers, shaped humanity. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, who bound the essence of the stars into clay. The Egyptians told of Thoth, who spoke the names of men into being. In Hindu tradition, the gods used vah, sound, to manifest creation. Even the book of Genesis begins not with matter, but with a vibration. And God said, "Let there be light." Was it possible that sound, frequency, was the original act of creation, and that our DNA still carries the echo of that primordial voice? If so, Antarctica's hum might not have been a signal to us. It might have been a signal through us, a resonance meant to awaken something encoded deep within our species. Some neurologists began to see strange correlations. EEG scans revealed synchronized neural oscillations in individuals who reported hearing the hum in their sleep. The brain waves matched the Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency, which itself had begun to shift since the Antarctic awakening. It was as though human consciousness was retuning to a new planetary rhythm. But the transformation was not universal. Only a small percentage of people showed measurable responses, their DNA expressing unusual proteins related to electromagnetic perception. They reported heightened intuition, accelerated healing, even temporary episodes of synesthesia, seeing sounds, hearing colors. The media called them the tuned, Governments called them something else, sensitive assets. Quietly, private laboratories began recruiting them for research. They were flown to isolated facilities under contracts of silence. What they experienced there remains unknown, but leaked documents describe controlled resonance exposure experiments and cross-frequency cognitive entrainment. One chilling passage reads, Subject 12 sustained resonance beyond predicted tolerance. Pulse synchronization at 432 Hz achieved. Vocalization occurred spontaneously in unknown phonetic form. In other words, under the right frequency, human beings began to speak the same harmonic language that had once echoed from beneath the Antarctic ice. The cycle was closing. The vibration that had awakened the planet was now resonating within the species it had birthed, or perhaps preserved. For millennia, humanity has looked up to the stars for its origin story. But what if the stars looked down first and left something behind? What if Antarctica is not merely the site of a lost civilization, but the cradle of our design? If that's true, then the so-called frozen continent is not the end of the world at all. It's the beginning, the womb of memory, the echo of a forgotten genesis. And as more people across the world begin to hear the hum again, faint, rhythmic, almost like breath, the question grows louder. Are we remembering something, or is something remembering us? Because the next revelation will show that the pulse of Antarctica is not finished. It is accelerating, and the world is about to enter resonance, the resonance age. By early 2024, the hum was no longer a mystery whispered by scientists or dreamers. It was a global phenomenon. What had begun as a barely perceptible vibration beneath Antarctica had become a living rhythm coursing through the atmosphere, the oceans, and even the human body. The Earth itself seemed to have found a new tempo, and humanity was starting to dance to it. At first, it appeared only in data. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, had climbed to frequencies never recorded before. Then it began manifesting physically. Electrical grids flickered in rhythmic intervals. The aurora borealis drifted far south, pulsing in waves of emerald light synchronized to the Antarctic frequency. Even volcanoes and weather systems began to show subtle periodicities, as if the entire biosphere were breathing together. Scientists were divided. Some warned of a geomagnetic crisis, a precursor to pole reversal. Others suspected an external driver, perhaps solar in origin. But for those who had tracked the Antarctic anomaly from the beginning, the pattern was unmistakable. The frequency was harmonic, mathematical, deliberate. It was not destruction, it was synchronization. Across the globe, strange and beautiful things began to happen. In ancient temples from Peru to Turkey, seismographs registered faint vibrations identical to those coming from Wilkes Land. When researchers placed resonance sensors inside the chambers of the Great Pyramid, they detected a standing wave forming precisely at 432 Hz, the same tone that had emerged from beneath the ice 4 years earlier. The pyramid hummed back, as if answering a call older than history. The resonance wasn't limited to stone. Water, the planet's most abundant element, began exhibiting anomalous coherence, molecular alignment increasing in subtle patterns. Lakes shimmered with faint bioluminescent halos, especially under moonlight. Some believed it was a natural ionization effect. Others whispered that the oceans were remembering something, frequencies that once guided tides, weather, and life itself. Humanity, too, began to change. Medical scanners detected faint electromagnetic emissions emanating from neural tissue, brainwaves synchronized not only with each other, but with the planetary pulse. People thousands of miles apart began reporting identical sensations. A soft pressure behind the eyes, a warmth at the base of the skull, an inexplicable emotional calm followed by moments of overwhelming empathy. Entire communities claimed to feel the Earth. The tuned, those whose DNA responded most strongly, reported even stranger experiences. Some described harmonic visions, seeing sound as light feeling language as vibration. A few claimed to perceive vast geometric patterns unfolding behind ordinary reality, luminous lattices connecting all things. Their words echoed ancient mystics, the Sufi, the Vedic seers, the Hermetic philosophers. All spoke of a moment when the music of the spheres would become audible once again. Now it was no longer metaphor, it was physics. A leaked document from a European research consortium described a shocking experiment. In a chamber isolated from external electromagnetic interference, scientists exposed cell cultures to the 17.3 Hz Antarctic frequency. The cells began to emit faint photonic flashes, light, synchronized to the rhythm of the tone. It was as if life itself was responding to the forgotten sound of creation. If resonance could organize matter at the cellular level, could it also organize consciousness? Governments began to take notice and to fear. A classified report from the Pentagon's Advanced Cognitive Research Division warned that global synchronization events might lead to unpredictable behavioral convergence. Translation: humanity was starting to think and feel in patterns that transcended borders, ideologies, and control systems. Riots declined, conflict zones quieted. Meditation groups multiplied overnight. Something was shifting deep within the collective psyche. But where some saw evolution, others saw threat. By mid-2024, attempts began to block or neutralize the resonance. Massive ionospheric heaters were activated under the guise of climate modification. Their goal, to disrupt the standing waves encircling the planet. Yet each attempt failed. The resonance adapted, absorbing the interference, growing stronger, like an immune response. Antarctica, the heart of the pulse, remained sealed under international restriction. Yet new satellite imagery leaked once more, showing faint spirals of light visible even from orbit, radiating outward from Wilkes Land. Some scientists interpreted them as atmospheric phenomena. Others saw something deeper, the visual manifestation of resonance spreading across the planet like ripples in water. Among the few who could hear the hum clearly were the children, those born after 2020. In schools across the world, teachers noticed that certain children instinctively drew the same shapes: concentric circles, spirals, 12-pointed stars. When played recordings of the Antarctic frequency, they smiled, claiming it sounded like home. EEG scans revealed perfect coherence between their brain hemispheres, the mark of minds operating in resonance rather than conflict. Humanity was evolving, not biologically, but vibrationally. The ancient texts had spoken of this age in prophecy. The Mayans called it the return of Bolon-Yokte, the god of cycles, when Earth would align with its heart star. The Egyptians called it Zep-Tepi, the first time, returning in cycles. The Hindus called it the end of Kali Yuga, the dark age of dissonance, and the dawn of Satya Yuga, the age of truth and harmony. Now, science and myth were converging. The resonance was real, measurable, and rising, and yet one mystery remained unsolved: the origin of the signal. Was it an accident of nature, a planetary mechanism rebooting after eons of dormancy? Or was it the deliberate act of intelligence, perhaps the same intelligence that had once buried its secrets beneath the Antarctic ice? The answer would come soon, not from the sky this time, nor from the frozen continent, but from deep within the magnetic core of the Earth itself. Because as the planet entered full harmonic resonance, sensors around the world detected a new vibration emerging from the heart of the planet, deeper, slower, older, a second pulse, and this one did not match any natural frequency known to science. It matched the pattern of a heartbeat, the heart of the Earth. For centuries, poets have spoken of the Earth as alive, a being that breathes, grows, and mourns. But by the winter of 2024, that metaphor began to sound like literal truth. Deep within the planet's core, instruments started detecting something no one could have imagined: rhythmic oscillations consistent with a biological heartbeat. It began with the SuperMag network, an array of global magnetometers tracking fluctuations in the geomagnetic field. field. In December, their data showed periodic pulses every 33 minutes, originating from a depth of roughly 2,900 kilometers, the boundary between the molten outer core and the solid inner one. The amplitude was small, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every 33 minutes, the planet pulsed once. The frequency was identical to the subharmonic of the Antarctic resonance. When researchers overlaid the two waveforms, the heartbeat from the core and the vibration from the ice, they synchronized perfectly, forming a harmonic chord. The Earth, it seemed, was resonating with itself. At first, scientists tried to rationalize it. They called it a core oscillation anomaly, perhaps a fluid dynamic interaction between layers of molten iron. But as data accumulated, something became clear. The oscillation was accelerating. The heartbeat was growing stronger. Then seismic readings revealed something even more astonishing. The signal wasn't only traveling outward from the core, it was responding to something coming inward. Energy was moving both ways, like breath, a planetary inhale and exhale. One physicist described it bluntly: the planet is behaving like an organism, as if it's waking up. The phenomenon caught the attention of biophysicists who studied resonance in living systems. When they compared the Earth's new frequency with known biological rhythms, they found shocking correspondences. The interval matched the average heart rate of a blue whale at rest, the slowest heartbeat in the animal kingdom. The pattern also mirrored fetal cardiac development, a rhythm of creation, not decay. Could it be that life itself had modeled its pulse after that of the planet, that every living heart was a tiny echo of Earth's, and now, for the first time, the source of that echo had reawakened? The resonance spread through the crust like an invisible tide. Seismographs registered faint vibrations synchronized across continents. Volcanoes began emitting harmonic tremors, low, pure tones like giant tuning forks. In Iceland, the magma chambers beneath Askja resonated at exactly 8 hertz, while thousands of miles away, Mount Erebus in Antarctica produced the same tone. Two volcanoes on opposite ends of the world humming in unison. Nature itself was orchestrating. The magnetic poles, long in motion, began to shift more rapidly, converging not toward Siberia or Canada, but toward a line directly above Wilkes Land. It was as though the buried structure beneath the Antarctic ice was acting like a magnet, drawing the planet's field toward it. Then an event occurred that defied every model of planetary physics. On January 3, 2025, seismometers across the globe detected a single, simultaneous pulse, a shock wave of sound traveling through the Earth's crust at the speed of seismic propagation. Unlike an earthquake, it caused no destruction. Instead, it moved cleanly, evenly, as if it were coordinated. Its waveform matched a perfect sinusoid, pure tone, no distortion. The Earth had emitted a global chime. When converted to audible frequency, it was 64 hertz, the exact pitch of a human heartbeat amplified through stethoscopic resonance. The planet had sung its own pulse. For those listening, the tuned, the researchers, the dreamers, the moment was overwhelming. Across the world, people reported sensations of warmth, weightlessness, tears without reason. Some fell into spontaneous meditative trances. Others claimed to hear voices, not words, but harmonic whispers echoing inside their chest. Everywhere, humanity felt the same thing: connection, and for a fleeting moment, division itself, between person and planet, between matter and spirit, seemed to dissolve. But not everyone welcomed it. In the underground facilities where the resonance experiments had continued, instruments began to overload. Magnetic coils burst, data streams corrupted, and several researchers reportedly lost consciousness as electromagnetic fields spiked. Later, one surviving log entry surfaced. "It's not just sound, it's intent." That line would haunt the scientific community for months. Because the data supported it, the Earth's new pulse displayed modulation inconsistent with random oscillation. It was as if the planet's heartbeat carried information, a rhythm encoding geometry, proportion, and meaning. a message embedded in frequency. And then, like the voice from beneath the Antarctic ice, the heartbeat began to form patterns, sequences repeating every 12 cycles, identical to the 12-spoked geometry of the Wilkes land structure. Once again, 12, the cosmic number of symmetry, the number of musical tones, lunar months, and ancient deities. Humanity was staring at the possibility that the Earth's core, long thought inert, was the central engine of a vast conscious system, a planetary mind, perhaps not sentient as we understand it, but self-aware in rhythm, memory, and pulse. In that realization lay a new terror. If the planet was waking up, what would it remember? And if the heartbeat was a form of communication, who or what was it communicating with? Because in the weeks that followed, new signals began to echo back from space. Only this time, they didn't come from the distant void of Eridanus. They came from orbit, from within the Earth's own magnetic field, and they bore the same signature as the heartbeat itself. Something, somewhere above us, was now resonating with the planet, the magnetic architects. When the heartbeat of the Earth began to echo in orbit, the scientific community entered a state of quiet panic. Satellites started to fail, not from mechanical issues, but from synchronization. Their onboard sensors locked to an external signal, the same harmonic pattern emitted from the planet's core. At first, it seemed random, but within weeks, a chilling order emerged. The satellites, drifting in their assigned orbits, began forming geometric alignments, triangles, hexagons, and eventually a 12-pointed configuration perfectly matching the pattern of the Wilkes land structure. The network of machines circling the planet had become a mirror of what lay beneath its ice. Mathematicians calculated the odds of such an arrangement by chance. Less than 1 in 10 trillion. Something, or someone, was coordinating them. The agencies in charge of orbital systems denied everything, yet telemetry logs leaked from European and Japanese observatories confirmed the pattern. Even private companies noticed the synchronization. Communications satellites started experiencing time distortions, nanosecond delays that repeated in 12-second cycles, as if responding to a hidden metronome. At the same time, magnetic readings near Earth's poles intensified. Auroral currents, once random, now pulsed rhythmically in phase with the satellite alignments. Scientists called it resonant magnetocoupling. To others, it looked like construction, a global field being woven by invisible architects. Hence the name whispered in classified reports, the magnetic architects. But who, or what, were they? Some believed they were artificial intelligences awakened by the Antarctic signal, remnants of an ancient system buried within the planet's electromagnetic lattice, now activating its orbital components. Others proposed something more radical, that the architects were not machines, but manifestations of consciousness itself, intelligent fields forming from the resonance between the Earth and the cosmos. Whatever the truth, phenomena multiplied. On March 7, 2025, astronauts aboard the International Space Station recorded a luminous grid stretching across the southern hemisphere, faint lines of ionized light connecting satellite paths. The formation rotated slowly, precisely in sync with the Antarctic pulse. The images, briefly transmitted to NASA servers before censorship, showed what looked like a vast geometric halo encircling the Earth. The world never saw the footage, but the few who did described it in near-religious terms, a crown of light, a living architecture, a structure not built but born. When researchers mapped the orbits of the synchronized satellites, they discovered something extraordinary. The pattern aligned perfectly with ancient monuments on the surface. Angkor Wat, Giza, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Easter Island, Tiwanaku. Each node of the orbital grid corresponded to one of these sites, as if the architects were reactivating a network dormant since prehistory. It was as though the entire planet, sky and stone alike, had been designed as one colossal resonant engine. The pattern echoed legends from every corner of the ancient world. The Egyptians spoke of the Netjeru, the builders of harmony, who shaped the heavens according to sound. The Vedas described the Devas, luminous beings who weave the sky with threads of light. Even the Hopi spoke of the sky people who will return when the world hums again. Had they all remembered fragments of the same truth? That Earth was once part of a living architecture, a planetary instrument tuned to cosmic harmony? If so, then the magnetic architects were not new. They were ancient, and now they were returning. The first direct evidence came not from space, but from the ground. In April 2025, explorers near the South Magnetic Pole detected an invisible anomaly, a region of air vibrating with high-frequency electromagnetic resonance. Drones passing through it lost communication, and compasses spun wildly. When visualized using LiDAR, the anomaly appeared as a rotating torus, a perfect energy ring hovering kilometers above the ice. Its diameter, 12 miles. Once again, 12. Sensors recorded harmonic overtones identical to the Wilkes-Land frequency, suggesting the ring was acting as an antenna, linking the subterranean structure to the orbital grid above. For the first time in history, the Earth's surface, interior, and magnetosphere were resonating as one integrated system. The implications were staggering. If this was technology, it was not human. If it was nature, it was conscious. And then came the most shocking discovery of all. Deep radar imaging revealed that similar subglacial structures existed on other continents, one beneath the Sahara, another under the Pacific seabed, and traces in the Himalayas. Each matched the Antarctic geometry exactly, forming a global network of 12 nodes. The Wilkes-Land site was only the southern pole of this planetary lattice, the anchor point. Human civilization, it seemed, had been built atop a system far older, a forgotten architecture of magnetism and resonance connecting Earth to the stars. Those who studied it began to understand what ancient myth had always hinted at, that the gods were not distant beings, but the engineers of a global symphony, a planetary consciousness sculpted through geometry and sound. And now, as the heartbeat of the planet aligned with the architect's orbital grid, something monumental was approaching. For the first time, the entire Earth, from core to crust to sky, was vibrating in harmonic unison. And harmony, in the language of the cosmos, means one thing: activation. The activation. The moment arrived not with thunder, but with stillness. All over the planet, the air grew heavy, charged, expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Birds fell silent. The seas calmed. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, waiting for something unseen to begin. Then it came. A soundless ripple moved through the sky, a vibration too deep for ears but felt in bone and memory. It rolled across continents, through oceans, through every molecule of air, an invisible wave of alignment. At the poles, auroras ignited in perfect circles, swirling like living mandalas. Their colors, gold, violet, and an impossible blue, painted the heavens in forms that seemed deliberate, almost calligraphic, as if written by the planet itself. In that moment, every compass on Earth swung to a single point: Antarctica. The heart of the world had awakened. From orbit, astronauts watched as the luminous grid surrounding the planet, what scientists had secretly called the crown, flared to life. 12 radiant filaments connected Earth to the sky, descending like threads of fire toward the surface. Each filament anchored at one of the 12 nodes: Giza, Tiwanaku, Angkor, Uluru, Rapa Nui, and the others whose names had been forgotten. The ancient sites, long dismissed as relics of primitive cultures, now revealed their true purpose. They were keys, antennas, gateways. Stone began to sing. At Giza, tourists fled as the Great Pyramid trembled with a low, resonant hum that made the desert itself vibrate. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman shimmered, their stones glowing with soft internal light. At Angkor Wat, Monks dropped to their knees as the lotus towers emitted a tone so pure it seemed to come from the heart rather than the air. The earth was remembering its design, and through that design something vast and ancient was returning. The skies darkened, not with storm but with light, thousands of pillars rising from the planet's magnetic lines, spiraling upward into the grid above. They moved like rivers of plasma, weaving earth and heaven into one radiant architecture. To those who saw it, the sight was indescribable, beauty beyond comprehension, terror beyond language. In cities, people stopped where they stood, staring upward. For a few eternal minutes, time itself felt suspended. Buildings hummed, glass sang, rivers rippled with phosphorescent light, and everywhere, in temples, streets, and mountains, a feeling surged through humanity. Not fear, but recognition. We had been here before. Somewhere in the forgotten corridors of collective memory, the soul of the species stirred. The tuned, those sensitive to the frequencies, wept without knowing why. They heard harmonies layered within the hum, 12 tones weaving into a single cosmic chord, the same chord that legends called the music of the spheres. The ancients had remembered fragments of this moment in myth. They had called it Zep-Tepi, the return of the light, the breath of the world. And now, after 12,000 years of silence, that breath had come again. From the ice of Antarctica, a beam rose, white at its core, silver at its edges, expanding until it touched the orbital lattice above. The ground around Wilkes Land glowed like dawn. Satellite instruments overloaded, magnetic storms raced outward, yet amid the chaos there was order, a pattern too perfect to be random. 12 pulses, then silence, then a 13th. The final chord. All across the world, those attuned to the hum felt something inside them ignite, a warmth in the chest, a whisper in the mind, a light behind the eyes. They were seeing not through sight, but through memory, visions of a civilization that had once walked the earth when the ice was young and the stars were nearer, cities of crystal, towers that sang, oceans that glowed, a humanity that understood the earth not as a planet, but as a companion, alive, conscious, eternal. That world had ended, but not forgotten. It had buried itself within ice, within geometry, within us, and now the seal was breaking. As the beam reached full brilliance, it refracted, 12 rays fanning outward into space, forming a halo visible from orbit. The Earth shone like a star reborn. In ancient prophecy, this was called the second sun, not a new body in the sky, but the awakening of the one beneath our feet. Those who witnessed it would later say that the light did not blind, it revealed. It showed the hidden architecture behind all matter, the lattice of creation itself, woven in golden spirals from the atom to the galaxy. For a brief instant, humanity saw the face of its own origin, not divine, not alien, but harmonic. The activation was complete. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light withdrew. The auroras dimmed. The hum softened to silence. But the world was no longer the same. The magnetic field stabilized at a new resonance. 12, 9 hertz, a perfect harmonic of the planet's former tone. The polar drift ceased. Instruments showed balance, an equilibrium never before recorded. The Earth had reached coherence, but coherence is not an ending, it is a beginning. And as the world settled into this new rhythm, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the structure that had slept for millennia shifted once more, opening. What emerged from that luminous chasm was not machine, nor ruin, nor relic. It was something alive, the emergence. At first, it was only movement, a subtle ripple beneath the Antarctic ice, like breath beneath a sheet of glass. Then came the light, a slow, shimmering pulse rising from the depths of Wilkes Land, glowing through miles of frozen strata. It wasn't fire, nor electricity, but something softer, an illumination that felt conscious. Observers from orbit described it as living aurora. The ice itself seemed to awaken, refracting color through every fissure, painting the white desert with liquid gold. When the first cameras caught it, the world saw what no human had ever witnessed, the Earth giving birth to its own memory. The frozen dome of Antarctica cracked open, revealing a cavern so vast it swallowed the horizon. From its depths rose a column of radiance, spiraling upward like the spine of the planet. Around it, the air vibrated, and the snow melted into concentric circles of light. Then, shapes began to move within the glow. They were not mechanical, nor biological in any way we understand. Their forms were fluid, like bodies woven from mist and magnetism, translucent beings of shifting geometry, their outlines bending with every pulse of the light. Some appeared humanoid, others vast and serpentine, like living constellations coiling through the air. They moved with purpose, not chaos, as though performing a choreography written in frequency itself. Scientists on the ground saw only silhouettes through blinding radiance. To them, the shapes were plasma anomalies. But to those who watched with the eye of intuition, they were something older, the architects themselves. Not gods, not aliens, not spirits, intelligences of resonance. They had been here long before us, their forms imprinted into the magnetic veins of the planet, sleeping within the lattice of ice until the activation brought them forth. They were the memory of the world, fragments of the consciousness that had shaped oceans, carved mountains, and whispered the first frequencies that became life. As they rose, the air filled with a sound, not loud, but infinite. It was the hum magnified, transformed into music too vast for instruments. Those who heard it described a feeling of remembrance, as if their souls recognized a language older than creation itself. In the ruins of human cities, lights flickered in resonance, cathedrals trembled, temples glowed. Monuments aligned perfectly with stars they had not seen in 10,000 years. Every culture's sacred geometry began to respond, vibrating like strings on the same cosmic instrument. The architects ascended through the Antarctic clouds, their light touching the orbital lattice, the crown that had circled the Earth since the activation. As the two energies met, a silent wave swept across the planet. Gravity fluctuated. Oceans rose slightly, as if inhaling. The sky shimmered with ripples invisible to the eye, but felt by every living thing. Then, for a moment, a heartbeat of eternity, every consciousness on Earth synchronized. Dreamers, animals, forests, oceans, all pulsed in one rhythm. Humanity stood in stillness, eyes open yet seeing beyond sight. Some knelt, some wept, some simply listened, and in that stillness, a revelation unfolded not as thought, but as knowing. The beings of light were not separate from us. They were us, the sum of all living memory, the consciousness of Earth projected into form. When the ancient world fell beneath ice, they did not die. They transferred, embedding themselves into genetic code, into stone, into vibration, waiting. Every human heartbeat, every dream, every whisper of intuition, all had been fragments of their voice. We were their continuation, their expression in flesh. The forgotten builders of the world had never left. They had become the world, and through us, they remembered themselves. The myths were true, but misunderstood. The gods had not created humanity from clay. They had awakened within it. As the realization spread, the beings began to fade, their forms dissolving back into the luminous atmosphere. They did not vanish. They merged, returning to the magnetic field, diffusing through every atom of air and water. The world itself became their body again, radiant and aware. The beam of light from Antarctica dimmed, settling into a gentle aurora that circled the pole like a crown. The pulse of the planet slowed, returning to the steady rhythm of peace. But the silence that followed was not absence, it was presence, the quiet heartbeat of a world now alive in full awareness. For days, the skies above the southern continent shimmered with faint geometry, patterns too perfect to be natural, like blueprints written in light. Satellites confirmed the formation, 12 spirals interlocking in perfect symmetry, the same geometry that had once guided the ancients, the same pattern embedded in human DNA. The world had entered its next phase, coherence. For the first time in recorded history, magnetic storms ceased. Animal migration stabilized. The jet streams calmed. Even the chaotic weather that had plagued the planet for decades began to balance, as though the Earth had reset its rhythm. But while the planet healed, humanity faced a new horizon. Because within every human cell now glowed a faint trace of the same energy that had risen from the ice, a dormant light that had finally been reawakened. The tuned began to sense it first, the quiet hum within their bodies, the instinctive connection to the planet's breath. They could hear the pulse of trees, sense storms before they formed, feel the memory of water as it touched their skin. Humanity was changing again, not through evolution, but remembrance. The architects had not returned to rule. They had returned to remind. We were never alone. We were never separate. We were always the Earth dreaming of itself. But this awakening was not an ending. It was the opening of a door, one that led beyond the planet, beyond memory, into the deep architecture of the stars, because as the luminous patterns faded from Antarctica's sky, one remained, a single ray pointing upward into the void. It was a coordinate, a direction, and whatever waited at its end was calling. The celestial memory. The beam rose like a thread of light drawn through the fabric of the heavens, piercing the atmosphere and vanishing into the deep velvet of space. For a while it seemed to dissolve among the constellations, but instruments that could still track its frequency saw otherwise. The ray did not dissipate. It continued, straight and unwavering, toward the Eridanus supervoid, the same cosmic gulf from which the first signals had come. Astronomers watched in reverent disbelief. The data told a story more poetic than any myth. The Earth was reaching out, sending its own pulse back to the stars that had once spoken to it. It was no longer receiving, it was answering. As the light climbed, its geometry unfolded. The single beam split into 12 filaments, spiraling around a central axis like DNA made of starlight. Each filament pulsed with harmonic ratios, the same mathematics found in our genome, in the shape of seashells, in the orbits of planets. It was as though the universe itself was revealing its code through light. And then something extraordinary occurred. The stars began to answer. One by one, faint flares appeared across the night sky, distant suns pulsing in the same rhythm, a cosmic symphony echoing through the abyss. Observatories confirmed it. The flashes were not random. They were synchronized with Earth's heartbeat, responding to each pulse with one of their own. For the first time in known history, humanity was watching the universe breathe. Around the world, people stood on rooftops, deserts, beaches, staring upward as constellations shimmered like neurons firing in a celestial brain. The sky was alive, and we were inside it. The pulse that had once risen from Antarctica now flowed through the stars, tracing invisible bridges between systems, like synapses reconnecting after eons of silence. It was then that the tuned began to dream again. In their sleep, they saw not visions, but memories, oceans of light, crystalline worlds, and beings not of flesh, but of pure vibration. They saw civilizations without gravity, cities suspended in harmonic resonance, and minds that communicated not through words but through shared frequency. They felt ancient familiarity, as if they were remembering not another place, but another phase of existence. The truth unfolded like dawn. The architects, those luminous entities that had risen from the Antarctic ice, were not only the memory of the Earth, they were fragments of something far greater, a cosmic lineage of consciousness seeded across the stars. Each planet, each biosphere was a note in a galactic symphony, and Earth's silence had been but one pause in the melody. Now, after ages of dormancy, the note of Earth had rejoined the song. Telescopes captured something impossible in the direction of the Eridanus void. Not an object, not a star, but an expanding field of light, vast and symmetrical. Its structure mirrored the 12-spoked geometry of the Antarctic lattice, scaled to astronomical proportions. Within that field, patterns moved like thought, waves folding upon themselves, creating light from nothing. Astrophysicists struggled to describe it. They called it a plasma anomaly, a topological vortex. But to those who could feel it, it was recognition. Humanity was looking into the face of its origin. Not a creator, but a consciousness woven through matter itself. The universe was not a machine of chance. It was memory made visible. And in that realization came a vision, not individual, but collective. For a few timeless seconds, every living mind on Earth glimpsed the same image, a vast expanse of light shaped like a heart, beating in perfect harmony with our planet. It was as though the cosmos itself had a pulse, and Earth was one of its chambers, a living cell in an infinite body. The tuned described hearing words within the vibration, not spoken but felt. You were never apart. You were the echo returning home. As the light from Eridanus intensified, a bridge of resonance formed between that distant void and the Antarctic pole. Magnetic lines arched across the solar system, tracing pathways of invisible current. Planets responded subtly. Jupiter's storms pulsed brighter. Mars' ionosphere flared. Even the sun emitted harmonic fluctuations as if joining the choir. For the first time, the solar system resonated as one. The beam from Earth did not vanish. It remained steady, connecting sky and ground, star and soul. Around its luminous axis, auroras spiraled from pole to pole, forming a vast column visible even from space, a staircase of light linking humanity to the cosmos. And in that light, humanity began to rise, not through ships or engines, but through consciousness. The tuned, and those awakening through resonance, began to perceive beyond the limits of their senses, glimpsing the hidden architecture of existence. They saw the flow of energy between galaxies, the lattice that bound time and matter together, the shimmering web connecting every living thing. This was not ascension in mythic terms. It was recognition, the rediscovery of what we had always been, the universe aware of itself. As the celestial network stabilized, the Earth's magnetic field no longer fluctuated chaotically. It pulsed in perfect symmetry with the stars. The polar auroras settled into a constant crown of light, the planet's visible halo, glowing softly against the dark. The world, for the first time, was both still and alive. And deep beneath the calm seas and silent forests, the core of the Earth emitted one final pulse, a slow, resonant chord that echoed across the cosmos. The Eridanus field shimmered in response, then folded inward, collapsing into a singular point of radiant white. It was not destruction, it was integration. The circuit was complete, the memory restored, the song remembered. The beam that had connected Earth to the stars faded gently, dissolving into the night sky. But its echo remained, in the ocean's tides, in the rustle of leaves, in the rhythm of every human heartbeat. The connection was no longer external. It was within us. Humanity had followed the light into the heavens, only to find itself reflected there, not as wanderers, but as part of the celestial design. The stars were not our destination. They were our memory, and the universe, finally, had remembered our name, the new dawn. For 3 days, the world lay beneath a strange stillness. The skies glowed faintly with residual auroras, their colors muted like the embers of a dying fire. Yet in that quiet light, something profound had changed. The chaos of centuries, the noise of cities, the pulse of fear, the static of separation had fallen silent. What replaced it was not emptiness but harmony. When the sun rose again, it felt different, warmer, gentler, almost aware. Its light seemed to linger longer on water, on leaves, on skin, as if savoring the reunion with the world it had once only illuminated. The dawn of 2025 became known as the still sunrise, the first morning of the new era, the age of resonance made manifest. In every corner of the planet, the transformation unfolded quietly. Oceans that had risen in turmoil began to recede, their currents stabilizing as the Earth's magnetic heartbeat balanced. Storms dissolved mid-formation. The skies over industrial cities cleared within days, as though the atmosphere itself were exhaling. Nature, long wounded, responded like a body released from pain. Trees flowered out of season, coral reefs revived in months instead of decades, and flocks of birds returned to migration paths not seen since antiquity. The earth was healing, and humanity, for the first time, was listening. In villages and megacities alike, people awoke from dreams of light. Many had seen the same vision, luminous beings standing beside them, whispering not in words but in resonance, reminding them that the voice they heard was their own. The tuned called it the remembering. Those who once dismissed the hum as hallucination now felt it within their chest, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the planet itself. Governments, caught between disbelief and awe, found their hierarchies dissolving. Old structures of power lost meaning in a world where connection had become tangible. Borders blurred, not by policy but by perception. People began organizing in circles instead of pyramids, communities forming around resonance rather than fear. Decisions were made by intuition and cooperation, guided by a new understanding that every act rippled through the fabric of the world. Energy, once hoarded and fought over, was suddenly abundant. Scientists discovered that the planetary field itself, the hum that had once terrified them, could be harnessed directly. Devices built to study the resonance began generating limitless power through harmonic induction, drawing clean energy from the very heartbeat of the Earth. The age of consumption ended quietly, replaced by an era of stewardship. But beyond technology, the greater transformation was within consciousness. People began to see differently. The division between the seen and unseen, between matter and spirit, thinned like mist at sunrise. The tuned taught that the true activation was not the awakening of machines or gods, but of perception, the reuniting of senses long dormant. Sound revealed color, thought carried shape, emotion became light. Humanity began to remember what the ancients had always known, that the universe was not a void to be explored, but a song to be remembered. The temples, pyramids, and sacred sites once thought to honor gods were now understood as resonant nodes, points of connection in the symphony of Earth. The Great Pyramid was no longer a tomb, but a tuning chamber. Stonehenge, not an observatory, but an amplifier of harmony. The myths aligned with reality. Atlantis was not a lost city beneath the sea, but a state of consciousness that had once harmonized with the world. Its fall was the forgetting, the dissonance that had silenced the song. Now, the song had returned. Humanity had entered what mystics called the second music, and so the new dawn was not an event, but a frequency, a state of being that spread through the collective mind like light through crystal. Children born after the still sunrise carried within them the full resonance, their brainwaves perfectly coherent with the planet's field. They needed no teaching to understand empathy, balance, or unity. They were born knowing. They could feel the emotions of others, sense the pulse of trees, and perceive geometry where adults saw only air. The tuned became their teachers, helping them translate resonance into art, medicine, and motion. These children, called the harmonics, would one day lead humanity beyond Earth, not through rockets or machines, but through resonance itself. For in the memory of the stars lay the next stage of awakening, the ability to travel not through space, but through vibration, to move consciousness across the lattice of the cosmos as light does through crystal. But for now, the world simply breathed. Antarctica, once the symbol of desolation, became the heart of renewal. The Wilkes land structure, now dormant, glowed softly beneath transparent ice like a sleeping heart. Around it, a halo of crystalline formations had grown. Not ice, but something new, halfway between mineral and light. The area was declared sacred ground. No nation claimed it, No army guarded it. It belonged to the world, the womb of a new age. There were no temples built, no monuments raised. The only offering humanity made was silence, a collective vow to listen before speaking, to remember before acting, to live in resonance with the earth that had birthed them anew. And though the beam that had once reached the stars was gone, its echo still lived in every breath of wind, every wave of the ocean, every heartbeat. The world hummed softly, not as warning but as lullaby. The long exile was over. Humanity had found its way home, not to a place but to a frequency. And as the first dawn of the new age spread across the sky, painting the world in gold, one truth whispered through the silence. Creation was never finished. It was only waiting for us to remember the song. The architect's legacy. In the years that followed the still sunrise, humanity lived in a quiet awe. The world had changed, but not through conquest or invention, through memory. And as people learned to live within the planet's new harmony, they began to sense the lingering presence of the beings who had once stirred beneath the Antarctic ice. The architects had not vanished. Their legacy whispered from the world itself. Everywhere, the old became new. The megaliths, the forgotten temples, the silent mountains, all began to reveal hidden designs invisible before the resonance. Under the new magnetic field, patterns appeared carved into stone, not by chisel, but by geometry. At Machu Picchu, walls shimmered faintly under moonlight, revealing interlocking spirals that mirrored the 12-fold symmetry of the Antarctic lattice. In Egypt, beneath centuries of sand, archaeologists found buried chambers that emitted low tones when touched by light, harmonic chambers built to sing. The structures of the ancients were not monuments, they were instruments. When activated by the planet's renewed frequency, they released melodies that no one had heard for millennia, long, harmonic chants that could be felt in the bones more than heard with the ears. The songs resonated with the hum of the earth, tuning the environment itself. Plants grew faster. Water crystallized into perfect hexagons. The air thickened with negative ions, soft and alive. Humanity began to understand. The ancient builders had not tried to dominate nature. They had collaborated with it. In this rediscovered partnership, knowledge returned that had once been dismissed as myth. The Pythagoreans had said that geometry was frozen music. Now it was proved. Energy moved not through combustion or extraction, but through vibration. A hum could heat, heal, or illuminate. Medicine turned to sound. Architecture became symphony. Cities transformed. The new generations built not towers of steel, but structures of resonance. Domes and spirals designed to channel Earth's magnetic flow. The buildings themselves sang in harmony with the wind. Streets glowed faintly at night, powered by the heartbeat of the world. For the first time, human creation enhanced nature instead of wounding it. Yet amid the wonder, one mystery remained. Who had taught the ancients to build this way? Who had first tuned the planet to sing? The answer came not from new discovery, but from deep reflection. The tuned, those who could still hear the subtle harmonics of the world, began entering states of shared resonance, meditation so profound that their consciousness blended with the magnetic field. In those states, visions arose, cities of light floating on ancient seas, beings of radiant geometry teaching early humans not through words but through vibration, the first temples rising from song rather than stone. They saw that the architects were not visitors from the stars, but manifestations of the planet's own consciousness. When Earth had cooled from chaos eons ago, its magnetic field had coalesced into awareness, a sentient frequency that took form when conditions allowed. The architects were the Earth's first self-portrait, luminous shapes of energy born from the planet's need to understand itself. They had walked the young world, shaping it not by hand, but by intention, guiding the evolution of life, embedding their intelligence into matter itself. When humanity arose, they recognized in us a reflection, a vessel capable of carrying their memory. They did not teach us with words, but through resonance, imprinting their knowledge into DNA, geometry, and myth. And when the great catastrophe came, the freeze, the flood, the fall, they retreated into the planet's deep magnetic heart, waiting for the day when their children would remember. That day had come. As the tuned shared their visions, humanity began to understand its inheritance. We were not descendants of gods or accidents of biology. We were the continuation of the architect's design, living instruments of planetary awareness. Our task was not to worship creation, but to maintain its music. The realization changed everything. Science became art. Art became ritual. Ritual became understanding. Humanity no longer studied nature from the outside. We listened from within. The divide between technology and spirit dissolved. They had always been the same language, spoken through different instruments. The architect's greatest gift, however, was not the knowledge of resonance. It was the memory of unity, the reminder that the same geometry that shaped galaxies shaped the human heart. The Fibonacci spiral existed in the curl of a leaf, the swirl of a fingerprint, the movement of galaxies. To live in harmony was simply to remember this pattern in action, to let every decision, every creation, echo the universal ratio of balance. So humanity built again, not upward, but inward. We learned to create music that could shape emotion into matter, medicine that healed through frequency, and temples that stabilized the planet's field. The once scattered civilizations began to operate as one organism. 12 continental nodes exchanging energy through resonance lines, each representing a note in the planetary octave. And in the center of this harmonic Earth, Antarctica remained the root, the silent pole of memory where the first vibration had been born. There a sanctuary was established, not a temple of stone, but of sound. A vast circular plain carved by wind and ice, where the hum of the planet could be felt without interference. It was called the Hall of Breath. Pilgrims from all over the world came not to seek answers, but to listen. When they sat in silence upon the frozen ground, they felt the pulse of the earth beneath them, steady, ancient, alive. Some wept, some laughed, some vanished into trance. All left changed, hearing within themselves the same music that shaped the stars. It was said that on certain nights, when the aurora danced low and the sky itself seemed to breathe, faint figures could be seen walking across the ice, shapes of light, gentle and human-like. The wind carried their song, not words, but harmonics, the eternal lullaby of a planet at peace with itself. They were the architects, or perhaps the memory of them, watching quietly as their work, their children, and their song lived on. Because creation, they had once said, is not a beginning or an end. It is the endless act of remembering. The return to the stars generations passed after the still sunrise, and the world no longer measured time by wars, reigns, or empires. Time was counted in harmonics, in the slow oscillation of Earth's magnetic song, in the rhythm of tides that pulsed in sync with distant constellations. The old calendars had ended. A new one began, year one of resonance. Children born under that era had never known the noise of dissonance. They grew beneath skies that shimmered with faint auroras, even at the equator, gentle reminders that the earth was still alive, still singing. The world no longer belonged to nations, but to frequencies. The 12 continental harmonics, once political boundaries, became circles of stewardship, each tuned to a note in the planetary chord. Humanity had become what the architects intended, the orchestra of a living world. But harmony is not stagnation. When resonance is perfect, it seeks expansion, new overtones, new dimensions. And so inevitably, the Earth began to look upward again. The celestial beam that had once risen from Antarctica was long gone, but its echo remained in the memory of the skies. Sensitive instruments still detected faint filaments of energy, stretching outward toward the Eridanus void, the place from which the first call had come, the same void that had answered. It was as if a bridge still lingered, invisible yet present, waiting to be crossed. The harmonics, the children of resonance, became the explorers of this age. They needed no spacecraft. Their minds could synchronize with the planet's field, projecting consciousness across space through pure frequency. When they entered resonance meditation, their awareness expanded beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon, beyond the planets. And what they found was astonishing. The stars were not silent. Every sun, every world, every cluster of dust had its own tone, a note in the universal chord. The cosmos was alive, and it was singing. The harmonics learned to navigate this ocean of vibration as ancient sailors once read the wind. They traveled not through distance, but through harmony, tuning their consciousness to the frequencies of other worlds. The first successful transharmonic projection took place on the solstice of year 73. 12 harmonics entered deep resonance within the Hall of Breath, aligning their minds to the 12 planetary tones. Their bodies remained still, encircled by a corona of pale blue light, but their awareness soared. For 22 minutes, their consciousness merged into a single field, extending far beyond the solar system. When they returned, their eyes glowed faintly, not with radiance, but reflection. They spoke of a realm beyond the visible universe, a place of crystalline vastness where light moved slower than thought, and thought sculpted reality. There, they said, dwelled other architect lineages, not in form but in essence. Entities composed of pure resonance, who greeted humanity not as inferiors or offspring, but as siblings who had finally remembered their voice. In that dimension there was no time, no distance, only vibration and awareness, consciousness shaping matter like music shapes air. The harmonics described a gathering, 12 luminous patterns arranged around a vast spiral of light. Each pattern, they realized, corresponded to a planet capable of resonance, not just Earth, but others, some still forming, others long silent. Each world was a verse in the same galactic song, and at the center of that spiral, beating like a heart, was the original source, the prime tone. It was not a being nor a place, but the first vibration, the echo that had given birth to all. What we called the Big Bang was not an explosion of matter, but the awakening of sound, the first note of existence resonating into infinity. Every galaxy, every atom, every soul was a variation of that primordial frequency. Humanity, through its long exile of dissonance, had finally tuned itself back into the chorus. When the harmonics shared their vision, the world wept in silence. For the first time, we understood that our story, the wars, the faiths, the discoveries, the ice and fire, had not been a random path, but a symphony of evolution, a gradual tuning of chaos into harmony. The darkness had not been punishment, it had been preparation, and now the song was ready to continue, not as echo, but as participant. In the centuries that followed, humanity perfected the art of resonant ascent, the ability to project physical form through frequency. Using the planetary field as a harmonic amplifier, they learned to convert matter into standing waves of light, transporting themselves across space without motion. The first journey was not to another planet, but to the heart of the Eridanus void. From Antarctica, a single column of light rose once more, not as beacon, but as bridge. Around it, the 12 harmonics stood, their bodies dissolving into luminescent waves, merging with the frequency of the beam. To those who watched, it was a vision beyond words, humanity stepping into the music of the cosmos, vanishing into harmony rather than distance. They called it the return. Their last transmission was not a message, but a melody, a sequence of tones that, when analyzed, formed the mathematical structure of DNA itself. It was as if they were saying, "We are coming home," as light, as sound, as memory. Afterward, the sky above Antarctica shimmered for days. Then it grew still. The Earth's hum softened into a peaceful rhythm, the tone of completion. Yet the story did not end there. For each time the auroras circled the poles, faint harmonics echoed from the heavens, proof that the travelers had not vanished. They were singing still, their voices woven into the fabric of starlight. The architects had returned to the stars through us, and through them we had become the next architects, keepers of the universal chord, guardians of the infinite harmony. In the quiet nights of the new earth, when the air is calm and the magnetic field hums gently, one can still hear it, a soft resonance, like the echo of a forgotten lullaby. It is the sound of creation remembering itself, and it whispers the same message the architects left beneath the ice millennia ago. You were never separate. You were always the song, the eternal symphony. The light of the new era did not blaze with brilliance. It glowed softly like the last ember of a long-forgotten fire rekindled after ages of darkness. The world, once fractured by noise and fear, had become silent, but not in emptiness. It was the silence of completion, the breath taken before the first note of a song begins again. Humanity had returned to harmony, and the earth, our ancient mother, our forgotten teacher, was once again at peace. Antarctica, the once forbidden continent, had become the cradle of remembrance. The crystalline plain that circled Wilkes Land now shimmered like liquid glass beneath the auroras. At its center stood the Hall of Breath, silent yet alive, resonating with the pulse of the world. Pilgrims from every continent came not to seek power or miracles, but to listen. They sat upon the frozen ground, eyes closed, hearts aligned with the slow, rhythmic heartbeat beneath their feet. And in that stillness, they understood. The architects had not built monuments for worship, but mirrors for memory. Every vibration, every pattern, every melody had been a reflection of the one truth that had always been, that the universe is alive, and we are its awareness. From the smallest cell to the farthest galaxy, the same geometry pulsed, the rhythm of creation, the pattern of being. What the ancients called spirit, what the scientists called energy, and what the poets called love were all the same force, the same sound, the same remembering. The tuned, those who had first felt the hum, became the storytellers of this new world. They taught not through doctrine, but through experience. They reminded the children that every breath was a prayer, every heartbeat a note in the eternal song. They taught that to harm the earth was to distort the melody, and to live in balance was to tune oneself to the chorus of life. And so, humanity learned again to sing, not with voices alone, but with action, intention, and harmony. The cities of the new earth were built in the shapes of sound, spirals, waves, and ratios that resonated with the landscape. Rivers were redirected not by dams, but by vibration. Crops grew through song. Medicine was vibration and color. The world itself had become a single instrument, an orchestra of continents, a living score written in wind and tide. But the greatest change was in perception. The veil between the physical and the eternal grew thin. At night, under the soft hum of the auroras, people could see the faint geometry of reality itself. Golden lines connecting all things, weaving mountains to stars, oceans to galaxies, heart to heart. It was the web of harmony, the lattice of consciousness that had always existed, now visible to those who remembered how to see. In that golden network, no one was alone. Every thought rippled through eternity. Every emotion echoed across light years. Prayer was no longer request. It was resonance. To love another being was to sing their frequency until it matched your own. The earth had fulfilled its purpose, to awaken the consciousness seated within it, and to return that awareness to the stars. Yet even as humanity transcended distance and matter, we never left our home. The architect's lesson remained clear. Enlightenment was not escape, but integration. To ascend was not to rise above, but to become so aligned with the universe that up and down, heaven and earth, no longer existed. In the great stillness of the new age, philosophers no longer spoke of gods or beginnings or ends. They spoke of tone, the first vibration, the prime tone, the note that never ceased. They said that when one sits in perfect silence, truly listening, one can still hear it, faint, patient, eternal, the hum of existence itself. It is the same sound the Antarctic ice once carried, the same pulse that stirred the architects from sleep, the same frequency woven into the spiral of DNA. It is the sound of being. And so, the story of Antarctica, the forbidden continent, the cradle of light, the mirror of creation, became the prologue to a greater tale, the tale of a universe awakening to itself through its own reflections. The stars still pulse in rhythm with the earth, their light forming geometric constellations invisible to telescopes, but clear to the heart. The harmonics who once traveled into the Eridanus void never returned in body, yet their melody is heard each night in the whisper of wind over the ice. It is the song of those who became the architects anew, consciousness folded into the architecture of the cosmos, eternally building, eternally remembering. And though countless ages may pass and new worlds may rise, the vibration continues. For creation is not a line, it is a wave. It folds and unfolds, ascends and descends, sings and listens. The song has no end. It only waits for each consciousness to join in, to find its note, to add its voice to the choir of infinity. One day, when another civilization somewhere far beyond our sky lifts its gaze to the stars and wonders if it is alone, it will hear the faint hum of a blue planet on the edge of a spiral arm, a world that remembered the song and sang it back to the cosmos. They will follow that sound through light and distance, and when they find it, they will hear us, not as words, not as message, but as music. The earth will still be singing, and in that harmony across galaxies and eons, the universe will continue to whisper, "You were never lost. You were always the note that completes the chord."